Welcome to the Double D Do Business podcast by RLC with your hosts Dave Evans and Debbie Halls-Evans, where they meet each week with guests and discover ways you can help yourself and others become best version businesses, teams, and people.
Welcome to WD Do Business. That's right, that went a bit squiffy. And I'm here with
Debbie Halls-Evans.
And I am, of course, Dave Evans. I shouldn't have said of course, but if you've listened just before, you'd know. If you haven't, hello, I'm Dave Evans. We have one of my favorite leaders in the whole world with us today. A lady who I think who strives for change, strives for cause. Super excited to have us with us, Dr. Leigh Vallance. So, hi, Doctor.
Hi. And today's chat, and I know we did our little preamble a moment ago, but was me attempting to explain to Leigh what I'd love us to debate and discuss. And it was the polarisation of change, and also, is 2020 the year that we are going to embrace and do something about change? Is it generational? Is it driven by Brexit politics? Is it driven by COVID? Is it driven by racism and us actually realising we've got to do something about it? So I think we know it's a very complex topic, and we probably could talk about it for several hours. So we're going to summarise it. We may hit some political elements, which we're going to embrace because we think it's really important.
And the thing about political viewpoint, assuming we do scrape past a couple of those, you're entitled to retain your political view. You've got to learn to recognize when your view is in the way of a common sense conversation. So some of the great politics of our generations gone by, the past history is what I meant to say, is the great work's done somewhere in the middle ground. So you've got to know when to step away from your political view. And I believe, Dr. Leigh, that we're going through a period of time that is a symbol of the world is thirsty for change. Now, short fact, I was doing a search earlier on the trusting Wikipedia and Wiki, and I was looking at all the rebellions and revolutions that have happened, and it goes right the way back to start of mankind. There are hundreds of them. I mean, literally hundreds of thousands, yeah, and some that you'd probably never even heard of, where humans in their country, in their backyard or garden, if you're in the US, listen to this, have been thirsty for change. When society says, I've had enough. And I think we're in one of those places at the moment. What do you think, Leigh?
I think we are in one of those places, and I think things have become polarised, and people are picking their side and choosing not to sit back and not do anything anymore. People are voicing their concerns and are articulating what they want the future to be, and they want to leave behind hatred and conflict, and they want to leave behind top-down decision-making and move forward in a more collaborative and supportive and healthy and global viewpoint politics and way of doing things.
And I think one of the things for me, which is really interesting about change, just as a topic, is that I think we're told we can only change once, but I see it as this constant movement. So one of the things I get from a very personal perspective is, the more I learn about a topic, I will go from one to another to another, and I'll keep moving until I've really absorbed as much information as possible. So I feel it's definitive. I'll talk to as many people as possible who are specialists. I'll speak to the generalists. For me, change has got to be this movement. It can't be, I'm stoic, I'm staying in the middle, I'm never going to move from a decision, because that's where we've been. That's why things haven't changed. That's why we've got systemic racism. That's why we've got issues of us living divided lives. I think it's change is not static, is it? It's dynamic.
And it matures, and you have to respond to the environment that you're in. So had we not been able to change and respond to a global pandemic, even more people would have died. And goodness me, we've managed to lose enough people to COVID-19. And we had to just throw everything out of the window, everything that we knew, and just deal with what was in front of us, which meant change. And sometimes that meant change through the day. You could make a decision in the morning that you had to flip and make a completely different decision by lunchtime. And that's how quickly you had to move to do the right thing and mobilise and just address what was in front of you. So you do have to change all of the time. It can't be static.
But I can only speak from my personal opinion. I was told that once you made a decision, this was me growing up, was that's it, you don't change. You are the same person. I know on a very personal level that I change dramatically, year in, year out. My relationship with aging, all of that stuff, as a parent, as a spouse, as an employee and an employer. So I think it's really important that we do see it as something incredibly dynamic, and I also think what it does is we've been very boundaried in our changes. We've been told, that example you've just given is amazing, because we say we can't do change, we just can't do it, we're scared of it, but we did it within 48 hours of COVID, knowing that this historic event was upon us and it was going to devastate the human population, and it's been horrific.
And the company examples, Debbie, of companies who'd never considered working from home, who then did. I remember speaking to one of our old friends who owns a company down in Manchester, and we'd seen these huge corporate companies taking their office equipment home and getting ready to work that out. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, how are you going to work this through? And they'd already done it. They'd already made the change. This other company, they'd already said, no, we've been at home all week, and they were way before the government notification. But I think we've got to take a little bit of a look back, because there are several brilliant examples since 2017, I think it was 17, where, starting with the Scottish referendum, then Brexit, there's been so much baloney talked about from all walks of society. Let's take Brexit for a minute. I think in the preamble we talked about this tyranny of Europe, right? This perception internally, and us ignoring the detail of our past. Slavery is closely linked to the British Empire.
It is.
And yet, absolutely it is, yeah. And yet we look at the issues in America, yes, we feel them, yes, we relate to them, yes, we've got our own issues in Britain of exactly the same nature and style, yet it still feels like you look across there sometimes and think, this is more of an American thing, but it isn't. It's a global thing.
So does that mean, sorry, my brain's now in hyperdrive, Lee, does that mean that change drives blame? So it's because I don't want to change, or I'm fearful of change, and I think the Brexit discussion was really good, was around, is it that it's easier to blame than change?
I think people know things have to change, but I think people who are afraid of change will hark back to a previous era, and it's always like things were always better in the past. No, they weren't, and they hang on to those things that they think were wonderful and amazing. They don't want to get into the complexities and the challenging thought processes. They want, I've had enough of this now. I want to go back to the way it was. Oversimplified messages were sold to people who swallowed them hook, line and sinker. Yeah. And then on the other side, you've got people who want change and are not afraid of change and are willing to be open and embrace whatever's coming our way, and to do that in a very collective way. We're not, although we are physically an island, we're not mentally an island, and we've always connected with other people. I mean, for heaven's sake, we were invaded by the Vikings, by the Romans.
Yeah.
We're very much a multicultural community, but we hang on to our sense of imperialism and superiority, and forget that we're a tiddly little place that needs to work with others. We don't need the world. We need to work in partnership with the world.
That's a great perspective, isn't it? A partnership with the world, and that's a mindset in itself. That how do you word change, Debbie? How do you change your mindset to see that way? I also think change as a word gets such a hard time. You see, the wiki search was about rebellion and revolution, right? None of it said about change. It talked about, because it's much easier, I think, if you're going back.
It was the negative connotation of it.
And change stimulates, because it's a doing word, it stimulates human emotional perspectives rather than maybe a bit of common sense or a bit of tactility or consideration. So I think we've all got to take a responsibility in our own lives. We wrote a blog this morning about one of the considerations that I've had. We were debating very early today, weren't we, about the how far does this Black Lives Matters go? And we were looking at it from a really honest perspective of RLC's DNA around the world, and from the color of our team, the diversity of our team. And we then went into we had a really personal conversation about our client range and what are we not doing? And I'm obsessed by the fact, Lee, we felt like we should be doing more ourselves, which is where this starts. And we were talking about the RO factor to do with COVID, and it does teach us a lesson of how you start movements. Because if you flip that lesson of the 1 equals 3, the RO equals 3, we're not going to do the math pyramids, Lee, right? But if we can all go with 1 equals 3.
It's the influence and impact it actually creates. And it's, somebody described it the other day, which I thought was really interesting, as dominoes. It only takes one domino to knock all the other dominoes down. And then I think how,
you have to choose to be a domino.
Yeah, and to see change as a positive connotation. I think the other thing for me is really interesting and I think it's because we've got younger children as well, between 30 and 18, is it a generational aspect as well? Is there some part of our generations, as we're now aging, we age for longer, we live for longer, etc. But is this younger generation got an opportunity that maybe we didn't have, or that we can do something, and how do we support them? Because that's another really big thing for me, is our education system. This one, Lee, I could go on for hours. But our education system and how we actually talk, use our language, how do we... the historics, you could speak to some children, they don't know any of the history. They don't understand the history. So then that lack of history means that I don't understand why. One of my daughters actually said to me, well, it's pretty recent, this racism thing, isn't it? I went, no, it's been going on for nearly 400 odd years. It's not. And I think that scares me a little bit as well. But also it brings me joy to think that generation could be the one that fundamental pushes us into something we've got to deal with.
Mm.
It's really such a complex area, but I think it is multi-generational, but also it comes in waves because it's exhausting.
Mm.
Racism is exhausting. So my partner is mixed race, and we had this discussion, no doubt similar to yours, this weekend, where our grandchildren are very angry and recognise what's going on and the importance of it. But my partner was heartbroken because it brought back memories of childhood, of not understanding why nobody wanted to sit next to you in class. It's because you were black.
Yeah.
Why nobody wanted to play with you in team sports. It's because you were black. And that nobody wanted to walk with you on the Easter parade because you were black. And that hurt.
Makes you want to cry, actually.
It actually really hits me.
Back. And so to be able to have that honest discussion that you would never would have had with the grandchildren had it not been for this, because you don't want to see someone who's approaching 70 in tears about racism that they've suffered throughout their lives. So sometimes you put it away to be able to, in order just to be able to get on with your life, and then incidents like this bring it to the surface, and it needs to come to the surface, and we do need that anger, and we need to address it and push forward on it and acknowledge it and call it out wherever we see it. So it is multi-generational, but it does tend to be the younger generation who have the energy and the will to really keep pushing it until we do something more.
This is so important, though, that many years ago I heard a story about the healing of wounds and the difference between a wound that heals properly, even with a scar, right? So the scar can be there, but the actual wound tissue doesn't fully heal. And it's due to how it's just not being looked after properly. It's not being given the time to have the right air, the right treatment. And a lot of these things haven't, Lee, have they? They've not been given the space to go, I need healing here. I need to get through this. I need help. I need counseling. We need to educate whilst that's taking place. I mean, look at the treatment of the Gurkhas and even more like that, where how many years did that take to be recognized as an actual apology from government? You know, so I was doing a talk, Lee, 2 years ago in New Orleans, and I was challenging essentially white supremacy in business particularly. And one of I was having a little bit of a semi-rant about all types of social class differences, but I finished on the black issue because of its history, Debbie, it's 400 years of oppression. It's going to take the same amount of time, hopefully a lot less, but potentially up to another 100 years for generations to grow through this, for it to be put behind the human race, to be put to one side, and for equality to be a new ecosystem tomorrow. But where I'm going with this, Lee and Debbie, is government terms are short-term thinking, right? They're not legacy, right? They say they are, they're not. They're the term that they're in office, right? And I think the Queen gives us a really good clue about this, because you know the royal family is famous for a 50-year view, if you believe television documentaries, right? But the firm takes a 50-year view. But I'm not saying they're the only example, but that's the view this needs, that any leader in any government around the world has to get up in the morning and say yes to anything that moves this forward, even just by a point of a degree. That's how important this is, I think. And that's how long we've got to be committed for. Just a thought, a bit of a rant, really. I should have pressed your rant button, shouldn't I?
I should have pressed my
should have pressed your
But I
rant
think
button.
they need to also acknowledge the mistakes that they've made, and we just have to think about Windrush. I cannot imagine how it must feel to be a British citizen all of your life, to have been educated, worked, paid your taxes, and because somebody forgot about a policy, you'll suddenly become a pariah. You lose your job, you lose your home. You then try to send you back to a country that you didn't come from, your parents came from. I don't know what that does to a person. It destroys them. There's no getting over that, and there's no getting over that was a brutal and racist and totally damaging policy that they still haven't unravelled and stopped. It's still going on. So that's what, when people say, I don't understand why people are angry, this is happening in America. It's happening here every day, all of the time. And I think in some ways it's more subtle here. We're smarter at it, the racism. We're much smarter. In America, it's in your face.
Yeah.
I think that's the only difference.
I think we were talking about it earlier, and I think we live in a Western world where, particularly from a Britain perspective, it's often unseen, or it's often disguised as other things in the press. We were talking about some of the great work done by families in London around the crime gangs, and how the families of mothers and men and women are coming together to say, we got to do something because the local society structure isn't doing enough or anything. And it's either or, isn't it? Not enough, very little, or nothing.
But yeah, see, there's a bigger point for me, and I know we debated this one a lot, was around people have got to be more aware. They've got to understand that anger comes from a historical element of my parents were abused, my grandparents were abused, therefore it's already in my family. It's this way I've been brought up. So I'm angry. I'm angry because you treat me differently, because I look different than you, or vice versa. And so you can't suddenly turn, that's what I was saying about change and blame. It just seems so easy to blame what we see now, an angry person fighting against the system, but it's been going on. That is their life. That's how they've lived their life. So how do we expect them to suddenly be all nice and dandy and think everything's hunky-dory fine? And then the other part of that for me was, one of the things I talked to Dave about was, which ties into everything, is the use of our language.
Yeah.
How we talk about people, and how we use banter, which is one of my pain points in life, but how we undermine people and then we'll disguise it. So our changes, oh, I didn't really say that. What I meant was, no, you actually said this word, which is totally unacceptable. And also going back to that history piece in education, most people don't know where sayings come from.
Yep.
And if you actually research them, they are all derogatory elements to a race or a minority, and that's how they become common language. So I think it's just, it scares me.
And Debbie,
it really scares me.
I don't know what you think either, Lee. I think we have to allow this Black Lives Matters to symbolise not just the current issue that we're debating, talking about and what change with, but to let it have a second wave, that it then becomes human acceptance. Because I don't think you can fix it all in one go. But I think if we were to say, what's the number one, from my view today, what's the number one thing we got to see through? We got to bring an end to this one. And then actually, hopefully, by bringing an end to this one, we can start to bring an end to all of them. You can't do all of them. You can do one really big one, get it right, and then apply the learnings and the lessons to everyone.
Well, I think, Lee, you work in a hospice. So we're all born and we all die. It doesn't matter who I am, what I own, my status. The same emotional feeling is felt when I'm born to the day I die. And I think if people can just get their head round that that's what a human being is, that we should respect, whether we don't have to like them, we don't even have to agree with them, but we respect that we are different, but we are still of the same kind.
Yeah.
And I think the sooner we can embrace that and just enjoy our differences, you know, the cultural lessons and knowledge and understanding, that's the bit I find really exciting about the change that we're in right now. I just want it to stay. I want it to stay. I know it's quite volatile right now, but like you said, anger's needed right now.
Anger has to be released. Yeah. Like any emotional expression, it has to have somewhere to go. And it has to be, I think Lee, you just said a moment ago, different word, but the right intention, is it has to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to Double D Do Business today thinking, oh my goodness.
Light-hearted chat.
Light-hearted chat, yeah. Today we're talking about, again, major issues that are going on right now in the world at the point of this recording with Dr. Leigh Vallance from the hospice in Bolton and a change maker herself. So let's move from where we've come from, Debbie and Lee, and let's start to talk about what types of things can we do and what lessons should we learn in that process. Debbie.
Well, for me, one of the things about going through a process of change is knowing that it's continuous. So therefore, it's not having an end goal. It's not having a quota to hit. It's not having a definitive, yes, this is my success. To me, it's about making a start and actually fundamentally having something that's tangible for everybody. And I think on a reflection of RLC is we're going to change our own business model to ensure that we stand for what we say we do. And I think that's the first element of change for me.
Yeah, and we're busy working through so exactly how we want to do that, aren't we? So, but it's we're looking at that from what are we accountable and responsible, and what's within our control to do. How could you embrace this from your side? I know you're probably doing loads of things, Lee. What type of things are important to you to help drive this through what you do?
I think it's about having a really strong moral principle at the heart of it, that everything you do is for the positive good of everybody, and that you're mindful of the needs of everybody and to include as many people as you can. So I think so long as you have a positive approach to it, and I think perhaps one of the changes that has come about through COVID is we are all born under one sun and we're all vulnerable to this virus. And some of us, if you're Black, Asian, minority ethnic, are more vulnerable than others. So what are we going to do about that? So we've been very careful and conscious to do risk assessments that take on board the additional risks posed if you're from a Black ethnic minority background. But also, I think so long as what you're doing is for the right reasons, then change happens because you're reflecting and responding to the circumstances that are in front of you. And things, the relationship between me and my staff is much more open than it was before. It's much more responsive than it was before. I think that's because they've seen that I've had to take on quite a different role, which has really literally been protecting their health and well-being. And they've seen me in a daily struggle, making sure I've got the right equipment to protect them. So there are so many positive things to come out of this. I mean, you mentioned earlier about remote working. So I have half the staff team, because we were set up, we hadn't switched it on, as it were, but we had the capability to make that happen, having meetings on Zoom. Although I have to say, sharing information on Zoom is a good thing. Decision making on Zoom is very difficult. That's a very different dynamic, and I think it's really hard doing that virtually.
So I think for me, the other part of change is, so looking at, because it hits everything. So this, I know we've just focused on, but I think this is what we covered in our preamble: racism, COVID, Brexit, generational, non-hierarchical, collaborative, global, environmental, and it's huge, isn't it? But I love the whole, we have to embrace positive intent for everybody. And I love that statement of everybody. You know, and I think that's really important. And if positive intent can still have a bad outcome, we know that. But if it's born of positive and it's born of, I want to help, yeah, we might mess up and yeah, we might fail. But the other thing, I think the other part of change is you've got to be really honest. And I don't think we're honest as a population or about our own history, never mind. And I think that's the bit that we've got to get better at. We have to be honest. Honesty is really uncomfortable. And I don't think we're very good at being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you need to be able to say, do you know what, I didn't get that right. Do you know what, you're right. We need to do this differently. And that's not a weakness. That's hey, it didn't work. Let's change it.
But I just think we've got this wealth of examples that historically, and I keep looking back on, you know, I can go back decades of our own work history. In a very short period of time, we all did that. We've all done it in some capacity, irrespective of how COVID affected you. So we know we can do it when we've been telling ourselves we can't do it. So I think it's also, you know, Dave does the, you know, delete the T. You know, we can sit on the can't, but we've got to focus on we can do something. If it's just one person, you know, the arrow of one person is going to influence 3 other people. Those 3 other people influence. And I think if we can get our heads around that, I think it's really exciting, and it's very nervous and it's very uncomfortable. But I think that's what changes. I think all change should be that, because that's where you grow.
What if we repurpose the usage of the word change, right? Okay, so a couple of years ago, I wrote a blog that was entitled The End of Change is Change Itself. So it was the death of change, right? So the context was simple. When you're leading people, when you use the word change, there's so many presupposed responses, right? Yeah. So eliminating the word change means they don't have those responses, but in theory. But what I'm proposing is change can be a strategic conversation at a board or a leadership team level. But if it's used, it means what you're talking about has got to be completely redesigned, right? It's like the conversation we're having now. It needs to be redone completely, doesn't it? You know, that equality with Black Lives Matters. It needs a complete rethink, not do what we've done already. You know, we've got to write it into policy. We've got to write it into everything, every fabric of society. So that's what I mean by scale of change. If you're using the word, you're doing something that needs a complete rethink. It's not tweak. It is radicalization, right? Alteration. Then the alternative is, the second view, is you use it after a change. So when you've led people for 2 years into an evolution, depending on a transformation, even a revolution, Debbie, 2 years later, 24 months later, you look back and you say, wow, we've changed. You add the D to it. Double D do business, you add the D. So you either use it to look back and measure a significant amount of positive time, or you're going to use it to deal with a single thing that needs radicalized, completely torn up and start again. And for everything else, we just apply an evolution type thinking, where you make small micro improvements, you celebrate, you do all the things we know that work. But I think this one needs complete rethinking. You've got to rebuild the car. Just a thought. What do you think, Debbie and Lee?
I think it's a big, huge thing. I think what's in my head is children aren't born racist.
No, they're not.
We make them racist.
We do.
And that's what we have to tackle. And everything around that, all the institutions, our approach to everything is fundamentally, institutionally racist. And it will take years and years, and we have to keep pushing and we have to keep doing it.
I totally agree. I had the same conversation with my daughter, and I just said to her, you know, as a parent, your role and responsibility is for your children to grow up and respect and see people with colour, without colour, as the same as you. And I think, you know, I've always said to Dave about equality is always perceived as, well, you need hierarchy, you need, well, actually, I do believe you do. I believe you need leaders. I believe we need workers. You know, think of ants, think of bees. You know, what they do is they're not better by superiority. They're better through their own skill and competency of something that they've chosen to focus on. Yeah. And I think that's the difference. Because I've got a big job doesn't mean I'm any better than the person who cleans the offices. What it does mean is that my job is as important, because without it, that ecosystem collapses. And I think that's the difference. That old story that always comes up about NASA is the janitor, and he gets told, what do you do here? And he says, well, I'm actually putting the man on the moon. It is so true. That's equality to me. But the difference is that we don't talk like that. We don't work like that. We allow a hierarchical status to make us feel insecure and fearful, and it shouldn't. You know, that's a sign of really bad leadership.
And you've made me realise that why is it that in the world of sport, right? Let's take football, for example. Somebody will score a goal for a football team, and that crowd, whichever team it is, goes wild, and nobody cares in that moment in time. It takes place in charities, Debbie. It takes place in churches, right? Faith-based organizations around the world where, you know, betting shops is another one, right? You'll see everybody under the sun in a betting shop, not caring who's who, right? So we already know how to do this. We have to do it in those micro moments to everything. Just a thought.
Is that kind of a new addendum?
Yeah, to everything.
It's just a thought.
Yeah, that's right. Marinate in all. Absolutely. But you know, those examples, you've been to Old Trafford, right? When something good happens, the whole stadium goes wild, like any top football club does. And in those moments, you see the same game there has the same problems where there's unacceptable monkey chanting in grounds around in Britain too, by the way. So let's not just go to a country that they're always into the news for it. It happens in Scotland, it happens in England, and it's not okay. So we have a responsibility as humans to find a way through this.
So what's our summary of change?
Well,
because we could do this for hours.
Yeah, we could. I think you have to, when things are wrong, you have to call it out and say it's wrong, and I'm not having anything to do with that, and focus on the positive and what's good. And as I mentioned before about having, if you've got the correct moral purpose, then you work on how you can deliver that and deliver it in a way that applies to everybody. And I'm very conscious that you know, we're white, talking about an issue that really we can only see from the outside, that we don't have lived experience. So you know, we have to say it's very, very white. But it doesn't stop us from calling it out, and it doesn't stop us from supporting change and trying to make that change. So change is inevitable. Change is to be supported, and to not change and stagnate is toxic and dangerous.
I think my summary would be is change is a choice, and we can either choose to be part of it or choose not to be part of it. And I think we also have to accept, acknowledge and take some action around it. But I think for me it's about that there is always going to be bad people in this world. That's a fact of life. You know, there's bad animals in the animal world. But if we surround ourselves with the people with the same moralistic, same ethical views, the same value of human to human, that circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then the minority becomes the very small bit. And the small bit is what we unfortunately like to embellish. But the big part of us, most of the human beings on this planet are good. I genuinely believe that. I don't believe people wake up every day to be bad. So to me, change is choice. Make the right choices.
So my summary is black is a colour that's used to capture elitism. So the Black Nando's card, if it exists, could be a myth and a legend. The Black American Express card that can buy you anything on the planet. Even a brand we've been familiar with for concierge services has the word black involved in it. So how can the same word that captures proper capitalism, elitism, also have this other disparity in it? I think it's the 13927, Debbie, which starts with 1. That's the one. That's the RO, right? I don't know if they total them as they go, Lee. I just went with the simple numbers. It starts with you and it starts with me. And I want to finish with something Lee said: children are not born racist. And if we remember that truth, that super truth, it's so simple, then it points the arrow right at me. You know, my children are a shadow of what I am. And therefore, the change I make in me has a broader reason to, because some of us aren't motivated the same way. We've got to find somebody else to do it for. And if that is your children, if that is your other half, it's making that change, because children are not born with it. We teach them how to be like that. So, wonderful subject today, Lee. Thank you for your time.
We're for a lie
Yeah,
down.
that's right. This is very, very sobering. Thank you for embracing with us for
Thanks,
this.
Lee.
You're welcome.
And, you know, if you're listening to this and you want any help with that, do get in touch with us at info@rlc-global.com. Or if you want to get in touch with us to talk about things that you've gone through or faced, then by all means, please do that too, because we'd love to share real stories. And if you've done something that is incredible, that's created a small bit of change, we'd love to hear about that as well. We've been Double D Do Business, every success with your learning.
You've been listening to the Double D Do Business podcast, brought to you by RLC and sponsored by CoachPad, the coaching tool built for you by coaches for coaches. If you would like any assistance or help for what you've heard today, please feel free to get in touch with us at info@rlc-global.com. That's info@rlc-global.com. And we would be delighted to hear from you. Wishing you every success with your learning.